So, wow.
Kann man da die Klimaanlage hören oder ist das ja...
הכל בסדר גמור.
Ja, nee.
So, first of all, welcome to our press briefing, Europe-Israel Press Association. Frank Müller-Rosentritt has been very kind to give us the space here in the Bundestag. He's a co-initiator of the BDS resolution, which let's say passed Parliament about a month and a half ago. Gadi Taub, he has his views, which I think are very interesting, on anti-Semitism and how the intertwining of anti-Semitism has found its way in the BDS movement per se, but also in the intersectionality which is associated with it. I would say we have very little time. Also, one of our journalists has to run to the airport again as soon as, so until about just a few minutes before 4. The Member of Parliament, Frank Müller-Rosentritt, has to leave in about an hour, but he's also, I think, right?
Yes.
But he's also
maybe 10 minutes later we meet Middle East Freedom Forum in the next room.
Right.
And it's very
because actually we were going to do this together with them. Yes. They said, Oliver, we're doing our own event. Well, okay. So basically, anybody who wants to also talk then to this member of parliament can also have contacts to him. I would say without further ado, I would let Tal introduce Gadi. Tal is my colleague from Israel.
Hi.
Anybody who has any need or interest in having contacts to experts, contacts and contexts regarding almost anything that has to do with Israel, Tal is my right-hand person in Israel, and we'd always be glad to assist some of you. I know most of you. I'm meeting some of you for the first time, even by name, and there's some journalists who we've been talking to about 10 years. Finally, we get to meet each other. So welcome and a good meeting.
So thank you everybody for your time, and we are very grateful for you, first of all, for hosting us. We appreciate your efforts to the interest of what we are talking about here. And I'm very glad to see some friends that we are hosting in Israel in some press trips and some Israeli friends. So this is kind of an open invitation to all of you to have the opportunity and be our guests in our future press trips to Israel in different themes that we are hosting. Dr. Gadi Taub, our keynote speaker, is an historian. He's teaching in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He writes about politics and culture for Haaretz, which some of you might know as the most influential left-wing paper in Israel. He's very well known just as well as a screenplay writer, and most of the Israeli viewers know him because of some drama he have on prime time TV. But perhaps the most important reason that we asked Gadi to come here and talk is because Gadi is very unique and interesting ideas to share. Some of you might not agree to everything, but this is frankly quite okay because we are here for a dialogue, and please do feel free to ask, to argue, to challenge. This is why we are here, and whether you will agree or not, I can assure you it is not going to be a board session. So without further ado, Gadi, unless are you starting? Is there?
Well, I would suggest maybe the whole topic, it's a 50-50 thing,
Combined.
but I would say maybe Frank Müller-Rosentritt could begin with what motivated the motion and maybe the perspectives of where anti-Semitism, or the theme, what is anti-Semitism within the BDS movement, motivated him, I think, with the other parliamentarians to put this motion.
Okay, then let us start. So because it's a double name, Müller-Rosentritt, I'm Frank or Rosentritt. Not ask what you want. Okay, first of all, very well welcome, of course. Like you said already, the German Bundestag in this quite small room, but I think it's colder here than outside. It's the only thing it's missing. It's the La La Land and Golden Beach, but it's so thank you also Oliver Bradley for organizing this press meeting. For me, it's a great opportunity to talk to you, Gadi. It's a special thing. It's a very well-known Israeli expert in anti-Semitism and the BDS movement. It's for me a great pleasure to acknowledge him today. The high number of guests today, every chair is full. Despite the hot weather, show us that it's a very interesting thing we can talk about. Let me describe the process a little bit. Afterwards, we're going to discuss and have a dialogue, of course. In April this year, the FDP group, our Liberal Party in the Bundestag, adopted a resolution condemning the BDS movement and demanding to stop any funding or other support by the state to BDS groups or persons as well as. And it's of course very important. We not want to ban it. It's only to condemn, of course. And it was important for us to have a common resolution for the parties because of the political middle. We did not put our own resolution in the Bundestag agenda, but rather contact the parliamentary groups of CDU, SPD, Green Party, so that we have not the same result like the UN resolution, our UN initiative. It's very good for our party because we shape the profile for our Liberal Party, but I'm in the politics. Well, I'm a politician because I want to change something. So it only works if you work together and find a compromise, of course. Maybe it's not my text, of course, but this text is a text and I accept this text. Okay, but not okay. So I'm very happy that our four groups, CDU, CSU, SPD, Green, and our Liberal Party, find a compromise and a very good and precise text for me. Unlike the FDP, as I said it already, the AfD is our very right-wing party resolutions in the same issue. Our resolution does not ask for a ban of the BDS. It's very important that we do not all limit civil rights like the freedom of speech or the freedom of assembly, of course. Everybody who want to talk with BDS in Germany can do this, but not the property of the German Bundestag. And we not want to support with our tax, the money from our taxpayer. But everybody can do it, of course. So freedom of speech, especially for me as a liberal guy, is very, very, very important. So we draw a red line against anti-Semitism and we send a clear message. We take anti-Semitism very seriously, of course. Israel haters who demands ultimately lead to the end of the Jewish state. Boycotts of Israeli goods, artists, scientists should never be supported by German taxpayers' money, of course. But they can say everything, but not supported by our taxpayers. That's the main point of our resolution is about, and I'm very glad that there is a wide support by the Jewish community in Germany. The feedback is very positive, of course. We have also hate mails, of course, but not that much hate mails I thought. So maybe 95% is a very positive feedback.
From German citizens?
German citizen, also from Israel. So maybe I knew the wrong community, but I don't know. Very very positive. So I cannot say that people are against. And of course, I'm also aware of the critic, of course. But I'm sure that most of the arguments against the resolution can be disproved today. We can talk about. And for me, as a researcher, it's also very important to see both sides. You can see this side, and then we can understand each other, because we want to have a dialogue. We want to have a debate and about this, and maybe we have different opinions about this. That's in a democracy a very important thing. That it's good that we have one thing, different views, and I accept every view. You can say anything. That's good. So now I'm very excited about Gadi Taub's input, and thank you, that you're here, and it's your turn. Please.
Thank you very much, Frank, if I may. Thank you not just for this talk and making the time, but for your efforts on behalf of this very tricky and very important issue. You know, we have, in a sense, we have opposite jobs. It's my job to make things sharper and clearer, and it's your job to, as a politician, to soften and find compromises. But there are times where I think we clearly cooperate, academics and politicians, and this is maybe the time, because partly one of our greatest challenges in this day and age is that anti-Semitism has found a way to disguise itself in the language of human rights. So if you look at the BDS website, it is all about rights. And if you follow the logic, one can say that if you add on the different lines of the mathematical proof, then you reach the conclusion that the Palestinians have a human right to destroy Israel. Yeah. Because this is the way the BDS phrases its causes. The BDS, and Tal mentioned that I work for Haaretz. I don't exactly represent Haaretz. And as you know, Haaretz actually condemned your initiative. Gidon Levy, who is on a radical left, wrote a piece against the Bundestag move to condemn anti-Semitism and specifically the BDS. And later it was followed, much to my stunned surprise, by an editorial in Haaretz who said that the BDS is a peaceful movement applying peaceful means, economic means, in order to resist the occupation. This is a blatant lie. Anyone who has been on the website of the BDS knows that they're not against the occupation. What they call the occupation is Israel, not the occupied territories. Because the BDS has it straight up on its homepage that it supports what it calls the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, and among them is the right of what it calls the refugees. These are mostly descendants of the refugees to return to their home with accordance to international law and UN Assembly Resolution 194, or the Palestinian interpretation of that resolution, which is the return of the so-called refugees to their homes, that is, to the land of Israel. What this means is that the BDS has a stated goal of destroying Israel, that it does not believe in the two-state solution, or it believes in two Arab states between the Jordan and the sea. The very logic of partition should resist settlement on the one hand, Jewish settlement in the Arab territories, in the Palestinian territories, and it should resist, for the same reason, return of refugees, 5 million of them, into Israel proper, which means that there would be two states with Arab majorities. The whole logic of partition ever since the Peel Commission in 1937, certainly if you read the Onskop Commission's report in 1947, the logic is that the two national movements will be able to preserve their right to self-determination because each of them will have a majority on one side of the border. Now, I don't need, I guess, to elaborate the fact that it's been a long-standing Jewish trauma, that Jews were everywhere a minority and nowhere a majority. And so Israel is about the right of a people to self-determination, which is also the reason why Zionists, like myself, and I'm clearly a Zionist, supported the Oslo process and later unilateralism, because if you have to sum up Zionism, the principle of Zionism is political, not geographical. It is not about a return to the graves of our forefathers. This is the religious settler movement. Zionism as a political movement is about the political independence of the Jewish people. And note that the Zionists did not settle the old land of Israel. The old land of Israel is Samaria. It's where the occupied territories are. They settled around it because the principle was political and not geographical. The Palestinian national movement, and this is the reason that we don't have peace. The Palestinian national movement, we tended to think, self-centeredly I guess, but it applies to the whole of the West, not just to Israel. We tended to think about it as we think about national liberation movements worldwide. So if we follow the Western model, then a national liberation movement is about political independence. While both the settlers movement and the Palestinian whole, and this is why the Palestinian national movement is closer in mind to the settlers than to mainstream Zionism, because the whole of the Palestinian national liberation movement is a geographic idea of a homeland. And this is why it is about returning to the village that my forefathers lived in. The principle is not about creating a majority, it's about returning geographically to where my family was. And what this means is, once you understand this, you understand the logic of why we do not have a two-state solution. Because at every turn where a viable solution on the table was proposed either by Israeli prime ministers or by American prime ministers, and there were very serious proposals by Clinton, who went further than we wanted to, and then much further Obama and Kerry, and still the Palestinians always resisted. And if you want a clue, it is always about the right of return, always. And if you follow what they say, it's amazing, we don't listen. We don't listen, and Israelis and Europeans and Americans, all of us don't listen. We hear from the Palestinians what we imagine we would like them to say, and this is true of the right and the left. The left will tell you they are just murderers. The right will tell you they are just fanatic, radical Islamist, fascist murderers. And the left will tell you, no, they can't. It's just a symbolic thing. They are actually they are more like our national liberation movement, but they are not. And we should listen, because this is the point it always fails on. And so long as they perceive the conflict in geographic terms, then they reject the two-state solution. Now the BDS is a movement directed against the two-state solution.
So if you're against the BDS, you should be also against the settler movement, right? The same logic.
I am. Not everybody is.
Yeah.
But the same logic is the logic of geography versus the logic of sovereignty. And if you want a clear example of this, we talk about the law of return. What is the Israeli law of return? It is a law that allows all Jews, it's a repatriation law, it's the family of legislation. Europe has, some European states have one, Germany used to have one, I think it's changed in Germany. Poland has one, Greece has one, Finland has one, many countries have, Hungary has one, many have. Countries with diaspora have a repatriation law, which means that people who belong to the nation and live in the diaspora can get citizenship in a shorter order than others. The Palestinians don't talk about a law of return, they talk about a right of return. And the right of return is not citizenship in their state, it is about returning geographically to where they were. Now compare the two, because I would support, originally I supported a Palestinian law of return, which means that any Palestinian can become a citizen in the Palestinian state and therefore return to the Palestinian state, not to Israel. Because if they will return to Israel, we are creating a Bosnia. People who talk about a solution that will be inclusive and will create one identity for all are living in an imaginary world. Mostly they come from America or are influenced by America, and they think that all identities can be hyphenated. But as you may know, the Fatah and the Hamas settled their differences by Hamas murdering all the Fatah people. I don't see how in this constellation, if you add the Jewish component, it will suddenly become Switzerland. Maybe in the minds of a few hallucinating intellectuals, but as George Orwell said, some ideas are so stupid that only intellectuals can believe them. And this is clearly one of them. And so I think that in this context, what they are calling rights is actually the destruction of Israel. Now, they've managed to find a loophole in the West's immunity system. And this is when you sell racism under the language of human rights, people accept it. And this is exactly what the BDS does. And this is what NGOs do in Israel all the time. The attack on the legitimacy of Israel's right of self-determination always wears the language of human rights, usually applied unilaterally. So I will end with...
I've forgotten the rights with Hamas, for example.
Exactly.
There's no human right.
Hamas does not play that game, but it assumes that everybody else will. And so amazing things like, you reach the heart of the logic there. By the way, Herzl was the first to consider it when he asked himself what would be the status of women who are Arabs in the Jewish state. You, of course, understand what the problem is going to be. Do we respect the Arab culture and its treatment of women, or do we respect the rights of Arab women? And of course, Herzl in the Altneuland reaches a comfortable solution because this is a Zionist pamphlet. Of course, this is not a political science study. So he said, Fatma, who is the symbolic wife of Rashid Bey, who is the engineer, Arab engineer in this story, luckily, she wants to stay home. So we will respect her will not to participate in politics, which is a comfortable solution, but he certainly raised the right question, and we see this all over now, don't we? Should we respect the way some of the immigrants into Europe treat women? Should we ignore this? Should we celebrate intersectionality and then have Linda Sarsour stand at the head of a women's march, which is mind-boggling? She's for Sharia law. Sharia law treats women as property. This is a women's movement hero, but no one dares say it, right? I've been in many rooms where mentioning it caused people to look away and not want to consider it. So I think that they found a hole in the immunity system, and we are living in, and this is the meeting. I'll draw to a close with this and open the floor for questions. So I want to see what interests you. But I think that there is a combination here of what I call the new moral kitsch of postmodernism, which says that whoever is the victim is always right, which meets Christian ethics, in which also heaven belongs to the downtrodden. So now we have virtual immunity to whoever can claim victimhood. And so now you understand what's the most insidious part of this conflict and why we are not going to see an end to the occupation anytime soon. I'm sorry to bear this bad news. This dawned on me first when I spoke to Bassam Eid, who is a human rights activist in the Palestinian Authority, and a very brave one. It's very easy to be a human rights activist in Israel. Nothing happens to you. But if you are criticizing the Palestinian Authority, then Jibril Rajoub asks you for a talk. And this is bad news. So Bassam Eid was following a car of the security services, and he understood he's not coming back from this interview, and he started making phone calls. And it took Warren Christopher, who was then Secretary of State, to rescue Bassam Eid, who is a suicidal idealist. He is brave, like way too much for his own good. And I was standing, I told him this morning, I quit smoking 2 years ago, regrettably. But I was in this conference with many delegates from Arab countries, and I was still smoking, so it was just me and the Arabs in the smokers' corner. No one from the West or Israel was smoking then. And so these were the best conversations. And I stood there with Bassam Eid, and he said, you keep talking about the two-state solution, we're not going to let you out. And I said, what? We're fighting to end the occupation. He said, who do you think is going to protect us? This was the high day of ISIS. And then if you start thinking through his mind, he's a secular, human rights-oriented Palestinian from Muslim origin. He's not religious. And they looked at Hamas. And what happened in Gaza is that all the Hamas operatives were blindfolded and thrown off buildings. And so the Fatah operatives, sorry. And so if you look at this from the point of view of Abu Mazen, you will understand why he just rejected $50 billion. $50 billion. This is 5 times the reconstruction of Japan after World War II. And he rejected it. I told a colleague on the radio, a Palestinian colleague, look, I'm sorry to give you advice. She was resenting this because she said, you're the occupier, you can't give me advice, but I told her, look, I just tell you from Zionist experience, if it was Ben Gurion, he would have taken the money and then fought for other things, but taken the money and build a nation. This is what Zionism did. We said, okay, you don't give us, we're not allowed to have a state yet, we'll just call it a society, we'll do this, and in the meantime, we will build our economy, we will build our representative institutions, we will strengthen our national movement, and then make other demands. So I gave her this tip for free. She just got angry at me. But if you look, and I'll end with this, if you look at things through the eyes of Abbas, victimhood is his strongest card, he believes. He will not let his people rise beyond subsistence, because keeping them refugees is what keeps the Palestinian agenda alive. And so while he is filthy rich, he will keep them poor. He will not take the money. The occupation is, for him, what sustains him, because we protect him from Hamas. And I know this from the highest security authorities that I spoke to on confidence in Israel, who said there's an average of 1.5 operations in the Palestinian territory by our secret service. And he said, every time we call Abbas, and we said, we found a terrorist cell, they're against you too. He said, no, you take them out. And you can understand why. Because he doesn't want to appear an oppressor in the eyes of his own people. So we do this work, we protect him, and he can keep complaining about the occupation. What has he got to lose there? Nothing. Except his life. So we are stuck with this. And this, I'm not saying this happily at all. In my view, separation is the healthiest thing here. Each national movement goes its separate way. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't do ethnic cleansing on any side. There can be a minority. We have a big Arab minority. Maybe they can have a Jewish minority if it's usually not safe. But suppose we actually reach peace. So it's not about ethnic cleansing. It's about national self-determination. This is why we should strive for greater separation. And the BDS is attacking exactly that. It's an attack on the ability to separate, because it wants to return the refugees to Israel, not to Palestine. So what you are doing, member of Bundestag, if that's the right way to put it in English, Müller, what you are doing is extremely important. Just before I came here, I spoke with a friend of mine at NGO Monitor, and he supplied me with a list. I will be happy to give it to you, of the different ways that German money finds its way to BDS organizations. There is I spoke to Tovi as we walked up about how German government buildings make an effort to exemplify transparency. But the truth is that the German government is one of the least transparent when it comes to money, and it's very hard to follow what goes on through which Stiftung and who's connected to who. But some of this work has been done. And I think I identify with your frame of mind, not just argument, saying we don't want to ban this, we don't want to shut people up, we want to have an honest argument, but we want to say we're not going to finance something that is anti-Semitic. So in that spirit, I think the German government should make an effort to find the myriad ways in which taxpayers' money is going into funding NGOs with fancy names about human rights, which actually support the opposite of human rights, which is the BDS. Thank you very much. Perfect.
How strong would you consider BDS to be?
Economically, it's negligent. But I fear that the larger struggle is over legitimacy. And in many arenas, we are losing. And if you go to speak to innocent bystanders, which, well, the BDS, it's the BDS people, I'll not convince them. But if you're just an honest bystander in an American university, you will think Israel is a monster. And if you study the international image, you see, I took this piece of information from Ben Yamini's excellent book, Industrial Lies. In 2012, there were 22 UN Assembly resolutions condemning Israel and 4 condemning all other countries combined. Now, with all due respect, we don't abuse human rights in a decade what China does in a day. And this is not proportional.
And we bring this initiative to the German Bundestag without knowing each other. Because somebody asked us whether I am driven by him or some Jewish state, or I am the invisible hand of the...
Oh, probably it's the protocols of the elders of Zion.
So,
And you know that the Chinese love them.
Yes,
And they say, and positively, they say, you Jews, you're amazing. We want to learn also how to do this. Teach us.
Let me ask you a question.
If you could say who you are.
I'm Stefan Engel from the German news agency DPA.
My name is Daniel Masseri. I am a freelance Italian journalist, and I would like to ask you if you can explain this, sympathy for BDS in Europe and in the US, and this kitsch of postmodernism. How do you explain this in Israel? I mean, assuming that you probably know personally some of these intellectuals who are against the BDS, how do they explain that? Or
Not against it, for.
against being against?
Double negative or triple negative. Some of the then it's triple here. Some of this is egotism. If you take someone like Shlomo Zand, I knew him from my university days, so I wasn't surprised, who wrote a book called Who and When Invented the Jewish People, which is the shittiest piece of scholarship to see the light of day. It's ridiculous. Everyone who is a scholar of any period that he surveyed laughed at this. But look, you peddle this to anti-Semites and you become rich. So this is, for me, this is the most disgusting. But in the case of Land, I was not surprised. I remember him from the cafeteria trying to impress students, and mostly female students. He did nothing wrong, he just impressed them, but it was pathetic. And this is pathetic too. This is disgusting. I'm waiting for an opportunity to say this to him publicly, but I think he's maneuvering out of the duo.
But all of these 240 people, do you think they're in bad faith, or there's someone who genuinely thinks
some are genuine, some are self-hating and masochistic, and some, in this day and age, the other part of moral kitsch, and you see it in regular political correctness in America. Self-flagellation is supposed to be the ultimate moral justification. So, it takes a specific frame of mind. If you grow up as, this is a gay guy who was an LGBTQ and whatever other letters activist in Israel, to say on Holocaust Memorial Day, on this day I want to remember that the Germans are people too. The Germans are people too, we know this, but this is a Holocaust Memorial Day. So don't virtue signal by your endless generosity. You understand what it is. It's virtue signaling. So if you are the most alienated from your own interest, then somehow you're the most morally virtuous. And I find this to be mostly a show. It's not convincing. And you see this all over the West, while people are apologizing for something they didn't do, right? If you're white, how about apologizing for Christopher Columbus? You are not Christopher Columbus, so why don't you correct the wrongs of the day and apologize for what you actually did? Not symbolically for some, because this is not something that promotes compromise. This attempt at self-flagellation, moral purity is actually, I think, driving wedges between people.
You mentioned Bassam Eid, but he was working for B'Tselem.
And you know why he stopped working for B'Tselem? I'll tell you. He came to B'Tselem, and this is how...
Maybe not everybody knows B'Tselem.
B'Tselem is actually I think the most important human rights organization. It's a human rights watchdog which is Israeli and watches Israel. But it's very...
And focus on Palestinians.
And focus on
Israel
abuse of Palestinian
okay.
rights. But this is, the idea of human rights is that there is no difference between human beings, right? That we are all essentially equal. And then Bassam Eid documented some wrongdoings by the Palestinian Authority. And B'Tselem refused to publish it. And then he left B'Tselem. He said, well, human rights are about human rights. Whenever I discover human rights abuse, you're a human rights organization, publish it. And this is true, look at Amnesty, how much they condemn Israel and how much they condemn anyone else. So a lot of these human rights organizations actually betrayed their mission by saying, and it's a legitimate claim from B'Tselem, for instance, to say, we are Israelis and we want to make Israel better, so we focus on this. But when you have international watchdogs focusing on Israel, then other agendas creep in. There might be people who are honest, but not all of them are. And so anti-Semites clearly, easily write this tale, because again, it is a story of how Jews are uniquely evil. And you see this, how good intentions. I told this morning a story about, there was a little baby called Laila Gandu, whom the press all over the West said she died. She died of inhaling IDF tear gas. Now the Hamas paid her family. The baby died apparently of a heart defect away from the front, and they brought her there in order to blame Tzahal. And when you see...
Just to make everybody on the same page, we are talking about an incident throughout the Friday's riots that are taking place.
They're not riots, they're the March of Return.
They call it the March of Return.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you look at how it's portrayed in the press, first of all, the whole press leaked on the story. It was front pages everywhere. And then you get the picture of the baby and the dead baby and her mother, mind you, hugging her. She has a red hijab, and this is the Pietà. This is Maria holding baby Jesus. Everyone who sees the picture, it's striking. And this was all over the press everywhere. So the Jews have killed Jesus again. So it's not said, of course, but it's tantalizingly somehow there. And then 2 days later, it was discovered by an Israeli intelligence officer who has an anonymous blog. He went and read all the Hamas stuff, and he found that she died of a heart defect, and Hamas retracted their story. And it appeared as a correction on back pages of all the press. So you see, the innocent bystander, people don't, does anyone know how many Palestinians were killed by Israelis since 1967? Because you ask people in Jewish Voice for Peace, which is also a self-hating Jewish organization, anti-Israeli, clearly. And Bendel asked their activists, and they said millions. Israel killed millions of Palestinians. The actual number is 12,000 in 50 years, 12,000, mostly combatants, mostly, the overwhelming majority. But people think, as Ilan Pape or other scholars say, that Israel is committing genocide, nothing less. It's the least successful genocide ever. Since the beginning of the occupation, the average life expectancy of Palestinians rose by 20 years. It's not a minor thing. I'm not saying the occupation is a great thing, don't quote me. To that effect, this is not what I mean at all. But it's certainly not a genocidal enterprise. Yes?
Dennis Hagman, Taz newspaper.
Which newspaper?
Taz, it's
Taz?
T-A-Z. What do you think, what percentage of Palestinians supports BDS? Do you have any numbers, any ideas? And would you please define what does it mean supporting BDS, not distancing yourself from BDS, being a member of BDS, being a BDS activist? What's the difference between these things?
Since I think that BDS is clearly anti-Semitic, it's a racist enterprise, then any decent person must distance themselves from it. I'm completely with Frank on the idea that it should, as long as it's not direct incitement to violence, it's legal. Look, free speech is about protecting hate speech. Nobody needs to protect thank you. Everybody says thank you. That's fine. The problem is to protect things you don't like. So this is something I extremely hate, or don't like. But I think it should be. We shouldn't forbid